Wildman West here with another episode of Adventures in Bearland. That's right, we got some great episodes coming up. We've got George Shire coming up and talk about some of the WWA guys. But today we're going to be talking about the battle for Eastern Ontario. And Dave took over many areas after the regular guys just petered out. We're going to be talking about the London area, the Southwest Ontario area, but today we're talking about mostly the Eastern Ontario area or the Ottawa Valley. And that was Kasaboski's area, really, back in the day, from the 40s right up to the 70s. Kasaboski ruled Renfrew and the Ottawa area down to Hawkesbury and all the way up north to Sudbury, North Bay, and even further north than that. Kasaboski, and we've got his book here, The Wrestler from Renfrew. If you ever get a chance to get a hold of this, it's a great book on the history of Ontario wrestling and some of the guys that worked for Kasaboski. And there is a mention of Dave in the book taking over his territory. But yeah, the Eastern Ontario was ripe at the time. Kasaboski did really well for a long time. Eddie Quinn out of Montreal and Frank Tunney out of Toronto partnered for quite some time in Belleville and Ottawa in the 50s. And even Rougeau and Quinn had come out to Ontario when they were spreading out in the 50s also. Ottawa was a big town for wrestling, as was Hull across the river from Ottawa. Hawkesbury, Alexandria, a lot of the places in the area had spot shows too. And Rougeau did a really good job. It was funny because the ads I found from some of our content people, nudge, wink, wink, you know who you are, Roddy. We see the ads in French, which is really cool. And that was Rougeau's ads and Dave's ads at the time in Hawkesbury in the early 70s. So that's pretty neat to see in the newspapers, the French-speaking newspapers, where the ads were in French. Grand Prix came in also into Eastern Ontario over the time in the mid-70s when they were hot, bringing, of course, the giant Jean Ferret, who, we don't have to say anything else about the giant. But yeah, it was a big attraction for Kasaboski. Even the Grand Prix teamed with them for a while back in the early 70s. And Grand Prix, of course, one of our favorite wrestling promotions. Short-lived, but still, the guys, Jonathan, the Vachons, Andre, Kowalski, great promotion. But so Dave started off promoting out in that area in 1967 when he was still kind of co-promoting with Whipper Watson, and they did a massive tour of Ontario, what I call the cottage schedule in the summer, with Moolah was on the cards, Joyce Grable, and Whipper Jr., Gene Dubois wrestling Ted, his terrible Ted the Bear. And they started around 1967 when they were still working together. That partnership lasted for approximately 2 years. And then in 1969, what I call Dave's full-time schedule started up in about 1969. And that's where I deem him to be working full-time in the summer season. Although my records show him working from April in some cases right through to October. So it was more than a summer schedule. And Dave worked just about every night. So they had the chance, they had the staff, they had the people, they had the know-how, and Dave had swooped through there back in the early days. And I read something here about from the Drawing Heat book. I've got that marked here now. The professor's questioning Dave about what happened after the fire back in the 50s. And he says, what did you do? We picked up what hadn't burned and fucked off, the ring posts and the weights. What could we do? We had nothing. The ring posts, Dave took them over to some scrap metal with a friend of his, the garage in the corner, and welded the scrap into a portable wrestling ring. And they put it all in a rented truck with a few hundred chairs they had rented at 10 cents each a night, and presto, in less than 2 weeks from the gym burning down, they had a traveling wrestling show. Dave laughed at the memory of how they had no idea what they were doing at first. And the first thing he did, he rented the arena in Madoc. And that's kind of important because we've got right here Glengarry, and I've got some Madoc ads on the webpage That's the Wildman tribute page. Anyone who isn't who isn't a member yet on Facebook, and that's been our longest running page, over 8 years in there. And they at the time, Chicago wrestling was very popular on the Dumont network and around Toronto, and they restyled themselves after guys from that area, and Big Bill Meltby, not Melby, Meltby, Nature Boy Bodgers, the Mongol was the great Togo, and the Oriental Threat Dave himself was the great Scott, long black hair, good looking kid. And it goes on there, and that's from the Drawing Heat book. So it's nice to see that Madoc and that area was one of the first areas that Dave started out in the mid to late 50s, and worked his way through into his, unfortunately, yeah, right till the end, 87 or something. And the regular guys that came through there, it was crazy. You know, first off in the early 70s, it was Big Ange, Ange Mosca, and the Big K out of the WWA, Eric the Red, the two Tonys, Parisi and Marino. Vic Rossitani was a big star for Dave's at the time, battling mostly Eric, and they had some great matches, great bloody matches. Brower, and then right through to the mid 70s, the Stomper, the Crusaders, Stasiak, excuse me, the Maguires. Yeah, okay, they were an attraction. Enough said, right? Right up into Kevin Sullivan and Mark Lewin coming through twice for the Bear Man. In the mid to late, not mid to late 80s, early 80s to mid 80s. And then strange to see how the morphosis of the shows took from being at the start, they were all boom, 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 boom. So it was 2 weeks later, we'd come back with the revenge match, and there was no revenge. And then 2 weeks later, they'd come back with the strap match, then the cage match. And how that just followed along through all the towns in Ontario, Eastern Ontario, Western Ontario, all through Ontario. So that was one of the prime things that they did to build up the feuds and to build up the crowds for the next shows. We've got a lot of really great ads coming up on the Facebook page with Belleville and Alexandria coming from the 70s that I found recently, with stories about a lot of the guys, Rachel, Vic, Ange, bunch of great stories from the newspaper from back in the day that we found recently. So stay tuned. Don't forget to like. Don't forget to subscribe. Don't forget to comment if you so desire. And share, please and thank you. This is Wildman Wes, and we're going to come back with more Battle of Ontario. And we've got George Shire coming up. And we've got lots of great topics coming up on Adventures in Barrowland. Thanks. We'll see you next time.